Music for Nimrods. With us on the phone is noted media philosopher and friend of the program, Mr. Gerry Fialka. How are you, sir?
Really good, Dan. Thanks for all this amazing music in the middle of the night. Let it wake us up. Shut up. May the crabgrass baby open your mind and shut your mouth in your religion.
Outstanding, sir. Now, you have given me a poem you would like me to recite before we go to your extended piece. Is this true, sir?
This is true, a rare poem that Frank wrote in 1959 under the name Victor Belden. Take it away, Dan.
L.A. Night Piece. 1. Main Street. GoDaddies buy cheap wine. Shuffle. Shuffle past the Barber College. The SD bus pulls in. A funny black man jumps off, smoking regular size filterless cools. 3 Vatos. Fantastic hair. Cuffless khakis. Many thins belts. They still remember Johnny Ace. Fat wallets. Clippings about little Julian, Herrera's trial. Canvas bags. King Conch jars. A warm can of ABC. Dirty underwear. A rosary. A dozen Trojans. 3 joints in a Lucky's pack with no cellophane.
Wow, it's just as though Ernie Kovacs as Bercy Tubfield appeared on my very own Zoom. Thank you, Dan. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be on the world's greatest rock and roll radio show, Music for Nimrods. You know, that word etymologically comes from mighty hunter. Dan, that's what you are, to save the day and the night as a mighty hunter, builder of the Tower of Babel. Oh, and then the word Nimrod came to mean geek in 1983, but probably came from Bugs Bunny. And, you know, when they asked Frank Zappa, are you the Marx Brothers of rock? He said, no, we're more like the Three Stooges of rock. You know, his comedy music transcends Manipian satire and flips into a way of life. No matter how hard they try to sanitize, sell out, homogenize Frank, it ain't gonna happen. There's no brown lipstick in Frank's makeup kit. It can't happen here. That's spelled H-E-A-R. In one era and out the other. That's right, you heard right. Reverend Dan's been bitching radio for 26 years. And Frank's been zapping for 82 years. And 55 years ago, on a radio station in Michigan, Frank said, when he was asked, do you write poetry? He said, my songs are poetry. And dig this, Gary Snyder, the nature beat poet, said, my task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then bringing that seeing into language. How's that to contemplate? You know, T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. You know, and even Frank Zappa warned us in his song Outside Now, you don't want to see what's behind my eyes. So thank God Frank taught me to embrace these contradictions. He constantly gives us his essence and inner soul. For instance, go to YouTube and type in The Mothers of Invention, Oh in the Sky, 1968. Rephrasing Frank's intro, I'd like to thank Reverend Dan for giving me this chance to do something new on the radio. Right here, no other radio station will let me do this. And at the end of that beautiful song, Roy Estrada sings, Oh in the Sky, Frank speaks. We're involved in a low-key war against apathy. We annoy people to question their environment, to do something about it. As long as you don't feel your environment, you don't worry about your environment. You won't want to do anything to change it. So act before America scarfs up the world and wrecks it. And Frank did a lot to inspire action. Try this one. Go register to vote and vote. Don't do speed, it'll turn you into your parents. And most important, don't stop and keep going. So let's return to that Michigan radio show in 1967 where he encourages us to question conventions, rebuild society, motivate others to act, love the police as they beat the crap out of you, take a minute to show a real emotion. You know, Frank was serious about being not serious. And as Jonathan Swift says, satire is a mirror in which people see every face but their own. As Frank Zappa wrote and sang, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. So let's bamboozle the bardos. Ascension of the ancestors, a new AA. I dedicate this rant to Richard Dickey Ross, Mike Lang, and Art LeBeau, who all passed recently, and their presence in eternity. Time-space continuum. Dan, Frank Zappa forgot to die. Both Frank and James Joyce said all times are happening now. Frank, in fact, listed James Joyce as an influence in the famous 170 names in Freak Out. So I want to thank Frank. He shaped my behavior by teaching me to embrace contradiction and have a good time. He encouraged audience participation. So we are the co-creators. So let's try a quickie call and response with this Frank Zappa maxim. I'll say the line, then you repeat it aloud in your lonely teenage room. I'm a failure. I'm a failure. But I'm not a miserable failure. But I'm not a miserable failure. I worked for Frank Zappa for 9 years. Once I drove him to the dentist, and as we passed Hollywood High on Sunset Boulevard, I saw Original Sound. That's Art LeBeau's office across the street. I asked Frank, got any Art LeBeau stories? Frank mused. Yeah, he used to give his employees their paycheck on Friday and then play craps with them and win it back. Then in 1988, a fan called me at the Pumpkin Hotline, telling me that the song Memories of El Monte was in the new Dennis Hopper film Colors about L.A. gangs. Well, that song, Memories of El Monte, by the Penguins, was written by Frank Zappa and Ray Collins. In fact, Frank played vibes on it, and it was released on Art LeBeau's label, Original Sound. I was told to call up Art and ask him if there was any songwriter payment due. Well, I called up Art and had a little talk with him, and eventually Art sent Frank a check, and it was dog-eared and brown-edged. The phone number on the check was like HO57230. This is how phone numbers were listed many, many years ago, pre-area code. This clearly indicated Art rarely wrote checks to anyone. Now, these two stories may lead you to call Art LeBeau a record executive prick. 3 little words that Frank Zappa sang on the Tinseltown Rebellion album. Frank and his manager, Bennett Glotzer, had hired Marty, sorry, I forgot his last name, to literally get Frank Zappa's music played on the radio. Ha! Ha high aspirations indeed, unless you're Reverend Dan, who actually does play Frank Zappa's music on the radio. Thank you, Dad. So I went up to this guy in our office. I went up to him, Marty. I says, hey, how does it feel to promote a product with those words, 3 words, executive prick? And Marty said, well, there's pricks in every business. Kind of ironic. So back to Frank embracing contradiction as a way of seeing the paradoxical exuberance of being through music and manipulative satire. Dig it. By telling you these 2 stories, Art LeBeau may appear to be a record executive prick, but he really was not. Art just passed away at the age of 97, and he helped Frank Zappa on early on in his career. In fact, Frank recorded the music for the film Run Home Slow, written by Frank's English teacher, at Art LeBeau's studio. And in fact, another early film score by Frank Zappa is the epic film The World's Greatest Sinner by Timothy Agaglia-Carey. Restoration world premiere is tonight, ladies and gentlemen, at 10 p.m. at the Academy Museum. That's the old May Company building on Wilshire, which was built in 1939, the same year of Finnegan's Wake. So wake up, you Zappatistas. You know, check it out. This is a historical event, seeing World's Greatest Sinner at this highbrow movie theater. But back to Art LeBeau, he released some really cool early Zappa singles pre-Mothers, like Granny and Run and Mr. Clean, which these are songs that Dan has actually played on the radio. In fact, Art's $1,500 advance for Memories of El Monte, helped Frank get bailed out of jail when he got busted on false charges. Have you heard the latest? It's not out yet. Guy walks into an antique store and says, hey, what's new? So let me remind you to check out the Venice West tour on YouTube as I walk through this new music venue on Lincoln Boulevard in Superba in Venice, California. The first thing you see as you enter the club is a big Frank Zappa poster and the Freak Out Hotspots map framed next to a photo of Ornette Coleman. Highly this is like highly unusual for a rock club to have these people on their walls. Now, our Venice Beats event there covered the history of beats and beatniks in Venice. In fact, check this out. Frank Zappa and Terry Kirkman had an act called Rent a Beatnik. To play hipsters' parties. They actually got hired to play parties as Rent a Beatnik. Well, Terry went on to be the lead vocalist for the folk rock group, The Association, and he wrote their hit, Cherish. Imagine Terry and Frank as Rent a Beatnik. What a hoot. Now, I did a short poetry film recently with Ruben Guevara. He worked with Frank Zappa on the second and third Ruben and the Jets albums. An amazing story that Ruben tells so well. Watch the KCET Artbound documentary on Ruben Guevara. It's free on YouTube. Consafos is pure, uncut L.A. funk. He is the Mexican James Brown. And now he's doing political activism, poetry. He does duos with John Densmore. Ruben Guevara is pure music for Nimrod. Music for Nimrod's icon. Please read his amazing book, Confessions of a Radical Chicano Doo-Wop Singer. There's a chapter in this book where Ruben has a night with Pamela DeBars in a downtown LA hotel. It's better than Raymond Chandler meets Charles Bukowski. In fact, dig this, Ruben Guevara sang with Bo Diddley on Shindig TV show in 1965. Woo! Now, I hope you all tune into my podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. We've had lots of Frank Zappa guests, including Thomas Nordegg, Simon Prentice, and Pauline Roberts, who does an amazing version of The Black Page. Also, Timothy Carey's son, Romeo Carey, Ike Willis, Gary Lucas, who worked with Captain Beefheart, Chris Garcia, Ira Aingbird, whose brother wrote Don't Bulge Out That Joint, my friend. Elliot Ingberg's on the cover of Freak Out. And Brett Clement, he inspired another associate, the great Tyler Barham. His tutorials on YouTube on Frank Zappa on songs like Alien Orpheus and Montana and lots more are fun and informative. They're breakdowns that teach people a lot about Frank Zappa's music. In fact, we've just made a new film, Tyler and I, that's about Frank Zappa and Bob Dylan's encounter. It will be due out soon on our new YouTube channel called Rondo Pattoon. That is combining, like the alchemist Frank Zappa was, two words, Rondo Hatton and Coil of Pandit. We'll do these Zapatista salons upcoming, exploring more about Frank and how we could actually, if we really concentrate in this time-space continuum that Dan has provided right here on Music for Nimrods, new rewordings of questions like, who are the brain police? These are actually questions Frank asked. He didn't answer them. He asked them, what is beyond love? What is your conceptual continuity? Shall we take ourselves seriously? Is there anything good inside of you? Do you really think it can be told? Who could imagine? Ever take a minute just to show a real emotion? What can I say about this elixir? What can I say about this radio show? There is an ocean of more questions that Frank yelped that we can literally reinvent and take things a little bit farther. Let's discover new questions, since the ocean is the ultimate solution. A great quote that Frank taught me many years ago. Think about that. The ocean is the ultimate solution. An ocean is forever asking questions and writing them aloud along the shore. That's Edward Arlington Robinson. Yes, you can do it. Marcia McLuhan reworded Plato's necessity is the mother of invention, and Marshall reworded it to invention is the mother of necessity. This can be done, people. Try it. Arnold Schoenberg quipped, art does not arise out of ability, but rather out of necessity. Hubba, hubba. Ding, ding. Dan, it's really been a pleasure and an honor. You know, it looks like they sold Frank's Cocks and Balls now to Universal, and we'll see what happens in that regard. You know, Frank actually created things as the creator of these things. And for us to mess with them is an unusual conundrum that we'll all have to think about. You know, I'll leave you with the final benediction. Ben Ratliff talks about the musician's sound. That is, can it be defined in a single note? In fact, in his new book on Bill Frisell, Ben says every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. For example, me and you could hear Miles Davis's trumpet and know, that's Miles. We could hear Frank hit that guitar note on I Am the Slime, thank you for playing that song, and go, that's Frank. John Coltrane could be called slightly undercooked and urgent. Miles Davis could be called fragile and pointed. In fact, Ben says Bill Frisell's sound is wobbly and woozy. So I ask you, dear listeners of Music for Nimrod and fellow Zapatistas, to send in to me your 2 words, your 2 adjectives for Frank. You can contact me at laughtears.com. Thank you so much, Dan.
Gerry, thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
All right, that was the cue for me to start talking. Thank you for letting me catch that, Gerry. Also, you mentioned you have a podcast. What is the podcast once again?
I'm probably wrong about everything.
All right, and then we've got the YouTube channel, which is...
well, that's a hard one. We've combined...
Rondo Hatton and Corla Pandit.
Yeah, so it's Rondo Pandit.
Rondo Pandit, very good. And tonight at the Academy Museum, the Timothy Carey masterpiece, The World's Greatest Sinner, with the soundtrack by Frank Zappa. Tonight, the restoration copy. You know, Mark Toscano of the Academy, you know, the guys who put out the Oscars, right.
They actually have budget to restore films. So they went to Romeo Carey and got the 35 millimeter print and restored it. This is really super high. Hollywood in the May Company showing this film at 10 p.m. tonight. If you can believe that, that is like, the world does get better, Dan. I guess if you keep, 26 years on the radio, we're getting better, Dan. We're getting better.
A Zappa Dan miracle indeed, Mr. Fialka. Well, it is wonderful talking with you once again. Good to have us live in the middle of the night like it used to be, sir.
I love it live, Dan. That's what it's all about. And thank you for being Music for Nimrod as long as Art LeBeau. 79 years on the radio, dedicating music.
I'm on my way. I'm getting there. And we will be playing that 1967 interview with Frank from that radio station in Detroit very quickly in the program. So everybody, don't go nowhere. Stay where you are. Keep the radio right where it's at. 88.9 FM KXLU, Los Angeles.